big trade which surprised just about everybody today. The Giants trading Jason Pierre-Paul to Tampa for a third-round pick, and the two teams swapping fourth-round picks. Now, Dave Gettleman makes this move, you would think, for several reasons. First, the new defensive coordinator, James Bettcher, runs a 3-4. That may not be a great fit for JPP. Secondly, there's a lot of salary off the books that can now go long-term deals for other guys, like maybe Odell Beckham or Landon Collins. Willie, what's your reaction to hearing this trade?
I'm not surprised. Obviously, it's a business, and I think JPP, you go back to last year, they didn't produce as a whole. There was a lot of expectations put on that defensive line, and they just didn't kind of meet the par. I think when you have Snacks and you have OV, those guys are in the book, so they're going to be here for a while. But I think if you're really serious about signing OBJ, something had to be done. And I think this move was warranted, and, best of luck in Tampa.
Pat, did this move, you cover this team, but for people who live this team day in and day out, it seemed to catch everybody a little by surprise.
It did. I know for a fact, actually, it caught JPP by surprise, too. He had no idea this was coming. He actually bought a house, I think, last year, just bought a house in the area, and so now he's obviously going to have to sell. Did not see this coming. But one thing I will say, I wonder, everybody's looking at this as freeing cap space for Odell or Landon Collins. I'm not saying it's not, but I wonder, is this only the beginning? Is this Gettleman cleansing the locker room of players that he feels are not a part of what he wants the Giants to look like from here on out? Does Odell Beckham enter that picture? Does Damon Harrison on the defensive line? High-paid guys or guys that are due a lot of money. Is Gettleman shipping more players like JPP who are faces of the franchise level?
But weren't his guys. He didn't bring them in.
Yes, exactly. I don't know if this is the big move or the start of many big moves.
That's interesting. John,
well, I saw you made the point today again that he was also a guy that was joking around when Eli was going through his thing when he got the quarterbacks taken away from him. You think that played a role? Was he locker room, a bad guy in the locker room or anything like that?
Not a bad guy, but I think that instance reflected a lack of maturity and maybe on his part a lack of willingness to be the leader. He's a leader by example type, but to be a guy who is going to grow up and when things get bad, really take control of a locker room. And you saw, unfortunately, in that terrible low for Manning, how JPP really didn't grab it.
But to JPP, he didn't know what Manning was talking about. He could just be having a conversation with a guy next to him.
They had a meeting, a team meeting, where McAdoo had told the team what was happening with the quarterbacks, and so the rest of the team was aware.
Okay.
I can't put into his mind what he was thinking, but it was a bad look being there. A lot of guys around the locker understood kind of what was going on. He didn't.
And to your point, I thought it was interesting when things got hot and heavy and people started pointing out who were the locker room leaders. JPP's name never came up. It was always Castillas, or if it was Snacks, it was Eli. It never was his name. So to your point, at some point, if you're paying this guy all that money to be the face of the franchise, you give him a second chance after the whole hand situation. He has to do more than just play on the field. He has to be the vocal leader. And I don't think we've been here, and that's why we haven't seen him come up in front of the camera and really be in depth about what was going on with the Giants.
It's interesting, and I want to go back and hammer this point home because it's been brought up now. And you mentioned it. Everybody has thought this was cap space going to Odell or Landon Collins.
Yeah.
You're saying not necessarily.
It could be. It definitely frees the room for them to make that financial commitment to those players. I think Landon, no doubt, is going to get that.
But Odell, you're not sure.
I'm not sure because of this, because I think Odell has a little less leverage now than he did prior to that video coming out. Whether you believe it or not, I do think that's the case.
But that was due to his injury.
Due to the injury and due to the fact that they say, let's wipe the slate clean on you, making us maybe look in a bad light, and then that video comes out. So anyway, if Dave Gettleman, the general manager, wants him to play on this fifth-year option before they give him money, I don't know. Nobody has reported what Odell feels about that. Will he report to training camp anyway and be the player, be the good soldier in that, or will he hold out? I just think that even though the Giants want him to be a Giant, even though he wants to be here, there's a possibility that this type of move, because look at what they got from JPP here. I was talking to a former
third-round pick, in essence.
Yeah, I talked to a former general manager earlier who was saying, you're getting something back, but this is the kind of move you make when you're trying to get rid of that player. And so Odell, getting rid of Odell, obviously he's an incredible talent. If you get rid of Odell and don't draft a guy like Saquon, that's ludicrous. It's hard to sell that. Yeah. But if you give away Odell in a trade and you don't get back what everyone wants in return, similar to JPP, it could be a situation where the team just wants to move on.
Is the scheme really a factor here, the 3-4, or is that just something that they might use as an excuse for getting rid of the money and everything else?
You know what's interesting? Can I say this? Because you always hear coaches, and you and I have talked a lot about this. You hear so many coaches say over time, what's the difference? 3-4, a guy stands up, a guy puts his arm down. Yet we actually see on the field it makes a big difference.
Well, it's all
the time.
It's all about schemes, and in particular, this defensive coordinator, what he does best is put multiple DBs on the field, and so you're going to have a pass rusher, and you're going to have an outfit that's disciplined in their roles. Because right now, JPP and OV, they're pass rushers, but Snacks will tell you firsthand, you got to control gaps. So those guys are the playmakers back there. If you don't believe a guy can be disciplined in his role and be willing to take on that type of challenge, then it's best you move on from it. So this may be a situation where they feel like JPP just really wasn't the guy for this system.
Totally. And when you're
making a ton of money.
And when you look at their defense, Jerry Reese went out and made those 3 big signings 2 years ago. But now you had 4 guys on an 11-man defense getting paid crazy money.
Yeah.
JPP, like Vernon this year is a $17 million cap hit. Jenkins 13. Snacks is almost 10. So JPP, even though he was only going to be 17.5 this year. So you look at that and you say, if we feel like someone here is underperforming, we can't keep paying 4 defensive players this much money if we're getting the kind of effort we did in 2017.
But I know we're going to get into the draft, but you got to have somebody not rush the passer, whether it's a 3-4 or 4-3.
Well, I think not even that, Harv. I think it sends a message to the rest of that defensive line room.
No one's untouchable.
Nobody's untouchable, to your point. And I think to the rest of that secondary, you talk about Jack Rabbit and those guys, there's too much money on that side of the ball to not bounce to at some point say, you know what, we got to start feeding the offense because we got to need a balanced team. If you look at the Eagles and what Dallas are doing, they're balancing out their team.
But who's getting to the
team.
quarterback now? Who's going to get to the quarterback?
Well, the scheme will determine that, and that's why you do have a 3-4 because you will have multiple fronts.
You got Olivier Vernon.
DBs, OV. You still have Snacks. There's a couple of young pieces they'll bring along that can answer.
But I want to come back to this because I think this is a very big part of it. If you're Odell Beckham, I think they're flashing lights to you that we want to pay you. Right. Just keep your name out of the news for a little bit, and we will. Now, I know, Willie, you always think it shouldn't matter, but I'm just saying what I think the Giants are saying. The Giants want to pay him.
Then pay him.
Want to give him the money.
Then pay him.
I think it's going to happen. That's my point. I think this move opens. I disagree with Pat. Pat's take is that it may not. I think this opens it up.
But
to pay him.
I don't think this move stops Odell from being Odell.
No.
That's my point.
And
you know what I mean?
Nothing's going to stop him.
Right. So my point: either you marry him or divorce him at this point.
I agree with that.
That's just the bottom line.
As far as the pass rush, it's with this scheme. Betcher blitzes a lot. So Kareem Martin, the linebacker they got from Arizona, is a very good pass rusher. Alec Ogletree, the linebacker they got from the Rams, not a great run defender, but I was actually talking to someone around the Rams who said he's better on the other side of the line of scrimmage. He's good blitzing the passer. So Betcher wants toys. He doesn't necessarily want, we'll talk about the draft later, but it doesn't have to be a typical defensive end. If you give him linebackers who can rush the passer to work with, he can mix and match. He doesn't need a guy set.
And you got to understand, he's coming from the same defense Todd Bowles ran in Arizona.
Right.
So they're just mimicking
That's
each other.
That's what Bowles used to do. He used to blitz like crazy in Arizona, right?
But to the point.
But don't you think this frees up the money for Odell? I mean, don't you think they should give it to Odell, or they're going to give it to Odell off of this?
Go ahead, Pat. I think, listen, it's not about whether you give the money to Odell. It's really at this point you're in a crossroads. Either you're going to pay the man and know that he's going to set the culture for your team for the next 5 years, or you let go of him and bring a guy like Barkley in and say, hey, we're going back to being the old Giants and kind of wear out royalty caps. Because that's where they're at right now. Because there's nobody in the league that can't tell you he's not a generational talent.
Well, that's the thing. And so Odell's a generational talent. You've now freed up the money to pay him. Wouldn't it make sense to give him the money?
Here's the best argument for paying him right now is not only are you giving him the money and saying we believe in you and we obviously need a weapon like you, but
it's the only weapon right now.
Right, but regardless of how immature somebody in the Giants thinks he is, if Gettleman and the Giants, I've talked to other GMs who have said if they were to trade for him, let's say, the important thing is that you put him in a locker room with a supporting structure that is a good enough structure so that if he gets upset and wants to kick a kicking net or whatever it is, that you have the right people around him. So the Giants could look at this and say, whether or not they believe Odell's going to change, if we're getting the right guys out and the right guys in to be the right people around Odell, he will kind of assimilate into a new culture, and that would be the best argument.
We got to leave it here, but as all these guys who actually listened to the producer just told you, we are not done with this topic.